but just wanted to underscore some of what you just heard. So we're going to ping pong this a little bit, go back and forth on them. The first principle that I would want to highlight is that we can change or we can wait for the pain to get worse. When it comes to our sexual behaviors of acting out or doing what we don't want to do, those are our two roads. Those are the two options. We can either change and address it, or we can wait for the pain to get worse, because that's the nature of sexual behavior, is it is always an accumulative, progressive behavior. It really is the real life example of what James says in his letter to the church, James chapter 1, where he says, what is it that entices you and drags you away or causes temptation? He says, isn't it the evil desires at work in your heart? He says, when those evil desires, they give birth to sin, and sin, when it's fully conceived, gives birth to death. And no one plans for death. No one wants to have anything die in their life, whether it's the death of a relationship, the death of a dream, the death of our integrity, the death of a career. Like, no one wants death, but the problem is we don't plan not to. And I hear it in men's stories over and over that there's just this slide towards death, because that's what sin, when it's buried and we try to keep it under wraps and hide it, that's where it goes. And so this sin will take you further than you ever thought you'd go, keep you longer than you meant to stay, and cost you more than you ever thought you'd pay. That is the nature of sexual sin. And I think it's important for us to own that, to say, okay, I can either deal with this, I can face it, and in the way I like to say it, we can deal with it fully and finally and really be done with it, or we can wait for the pain to get worse. Because that's, in love, I want to say that because it's truthful, that if you're not willing to deal with it, the pain will get worse. It might be in your relationship. It might be the pain of not being able to relate to your kids and help them in their struggle. It might be the pain of something that comes up in a career. The pain will get worse. That's what happens. Or we can change. And that's why I'm so excited to have the church here in Temecula running the Conquer series, because it's an effort to say, we don't want to wait for it to get worse. We don't want to wait for any more marriages to explode or lives to be derailed. Like, we want to deal with this. And that's why when we gather together and we go through this material, it creates the change that we want. And so I want to encourage you to see which road am I currently choosing. And if you find that you're on the road that leads to death, maybe it's time to pick another road. Second one.
Yeah, so the second one is we may have people around us, but we need an authentic group. So I think it's really, really important to understand that you can isolate in group. You can be around other people, but be in complete isolation. And I don't mean just like on your phone, vegging out. I mean not sharing anything. I mean, really, you're stiff-arming people around you, not letting them in because you're afraid that they'll see what's really going on. And so an authentic group, what's really, really important is that authentic relationship, authenticity, requires a couple things in my mind. The first thing is it requires brutal honesty. You have to be willing to be brutally honest. You have to be willing and really honestly courageous to share the stuff that's going on. So brutal honesty. The second thing is it requires humility, because you're not willing to share the mess and the junk of your life if you're prideful. I don't want people to know what's going on under the surface. I don't want people to know how broken I actually am. So to be in an authentic group, you have to be humble. And then it's really, really important, as we kind of are exploring this, right, in this community, I think it's important to understand that honesty groups or accountability groups is not what we're after. Honesty groups or accountability groups are not what we're after. And what I mean by that is that if you come together each week and you're just reporting on how you did, and then, let's say we're in group, I come to group and I'm like, guys, I've been having such a great few weeks, lots of purity, haven't looked at porn, haven't masturbated, me and my wife are having sex, it's awesome. And then the next week I come back and I'm like, I looked at porn again this week, guys. And then everybody pats me on the shoulder like, sorry, man, keep working hard, we'll pray for you. And then that's it. No change, no movement. I'm still the same person, I haven't dealt with anything. And I'm just assuming that because guys are praying for me and that I'm praying and not actually doing anything to change what's going on, that it's all going to get fixed, and it doesn't. And so you have to understand that the reason why Pure Desire is not, our groups are not accountability or honesty groups is because it gives you a roadmap, stuff to work on, to change, because that's what has to happen. It's not just changing whether you have a phone or not. It's trying to figure out what in my heart and my soul has to change. And so that's why you need an authentic group and not just be around people who can, quote unquote, help you or pray for you. You have to be in a group that's working together on this stuff, trying to process what's really going on in our hearts.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a lot of people around me that knew my struggle, but it wasn't until I was in a group walking through an intentional process of change that any of the freedom really began. The third principle of freedom is that we must fight early, not late. That's one of the huge things I discovered in a Pure Desire group and walking through the Conquer series is what it means to be a man of integrity. Because I used to think that a man of integrity was a guy who was sitting alone late at night in front of his computer, feeling tempted to go back to that website he knew he shouldn't go to, and a man of integrity could get up and flee, right? Could get up and walk away. And what I discovered in the group material is that by the time you're alone late at night, tempted to go to a place you shouldn't go, you're already fighting a losing battle. Now, that doesn't mean you're not responsible. You should just give up and be like, well, I couldn't help it. But you're kind of in the illustration of you're like on a freight train running 50 miles an hour down the track, and now you're trying to pull the e-brake and stop it. Well, on a train, there's all that momentum. It takes a while to stop that train. What I discovered is that being a man of integrity meant learning how to never be alone in front of a computer late at night feeling tempted to act out. That it was about having an awareness of what my patterns were, being aware of what were the trigger spots, what were the places where I was likely to get in trouble, and then create a new approach to life where I wouldn't be in those places to start with. Now, the Bible tells us over and over that if we are feeling tempted, to flee. And so there's great advice there that if we find I've ended up in a place, do my best to flee, but I'm finding that victory is about identifying where are those places? What are the things I need to have in place, and then to fight early? Because as I go back to that train illustration, which is easier? To stop a train running 50 miles an hour down the track or to redirect it when it first starts moving? Well, obviously, it's to redirect it when it first starts moving. And that's the same with our sexual temptation or urges or desires, that when we feel that engine starts running again, if we know, oh, I know where this track goes, and I don't want to go there. Instead, this is the direction. This is how I deal with it effectively. That's made all the difference in the world. And so in a Conquer series, if you could come back next week, that's the kind of thing you're going to learn about is how do I fight early when the train engine just starts running and move it towards health right away. That's where success and freedom can really be found.
I think too with this, it's easy to assume for those of you that are late in life, that you assume, well, all the damage has been done. It's been going on for too long, and I can't change. I shouldn't change. It's not worth it. And I just want you to know that some of the most influential men I've met on this path and this road to recovery are men who decided late in life to get fixed, to get working, to change. And really what they're doing is they're now passing on this stuff to their kids, to men in their community, helping other families get healthy. And so wherever you're at in life, don't get discouraged that maybe you're starting into this journey late in life. It doesn't matter. Getting healthy is getting healthy, and being closer to the Lord is going to be so much more sweet and rich because of it. Okay, number 4 is get equipped with the resources. I think that there are a lot of resources out there for things like this. Obviously, there are tons of books on purity. There are tons of books on processing trauma and all of that. But I think first I just want to identify it takes courage to go looking for resources, because that usually means you've identified in your heart that something's got to change. And so understand, and look, sometimes we need to pat ourselves on the back a little bit and give ourselves some credit when we step forward in courage and we decide to do the hard, difficult thing in life. And so that's the first thing. Another thing really just to consider is that resources that say they're going to solve your problem in 6 to 10 weeks. For me, I struggled for 15 years with pornography and sex addiction, and you're telling me that only 10 weeks is going to set me free from 15 years of struggle? Sign me up, right? But the reality is it's going to take a lot of hard, difficult, long work to get healthy. So don't look for those quick fixes, because those aren't the things that are going to do it. They're not going to change you. Another thing is look for things that are holistic. Don't look for things that are just, here's so we love Every Man's Battle. Stephen Arterburn, we love his stuff. And he's got great tactics on ways to bounce your eyes or to avoid tempting situations. But that approach is great by itself, but holistically we need to look at stuff because there's stuff that happens emotionally, physically, spiritually that affects our being. And those things are always united, whether we know it or not, to our sexuality because we're built as sexual people, right? That's what we are. We're built as sexual people. And so to understand that holistic resources are really, really important that help you process through stuff. And then the last thing in my mind is really just find supplemental pieces. Like if you know that there's a great sermon podcast or there are podcasts on this stuff or there are blogs, find supplemental things that can be consistent touch points to kind of help redirect you. And so just be really, really aware that it's not just finding good resources, it's finding the right resources that do stuff the right way.
Yeah. And as you're looking for resources, you need a starting point, and that's really what the Conquer series is all about. It's to be a starting point of your healing journey. And so coming back next week and getting those resources, as Trevor and I were talking last night, it occurred to me that in hearing our stories and in coming this morning and thinking about the next 4 weeks, you may be as motivated right now as you've ever been to deal with this issue in your lives. And if so, I want to really encourage you to take advantage of your motivation and grab some of the resources. So in particular for the Conquer series, there's a study guide that goes with the videos. This is great to have because it has a summary of the videos, it's got group questions in it, and then it's got some homework for you to do some processing just to say, okay, what do I need to do with what I've heard? Because as again, from the book of James, if I see it in the mirror and walk away and don't do anything about it, it's useless, it's foolishness. But if I apply what I'm hearing to my life, then I'm going to really experience some change. So that's what the workbook, and then there's also a journal that goes with it where you can do some daily work, some devotional ideas, and then some group check-ins that just week in and week out are the same, but really help me identify what are my patterns. Going back to what I said about fighting early, not late, seeing what are my patterns and then working to change them right away, a lot of that work you do in the journal. So if you're saying, man, I need to be in, and maybe when you walked in this morning, you're like, this isn't really for me, but you've identified you need to jump in, whether it's for you or for your sons or to help other friends that you know struggle, grab the resources as your starting point because it really will, in a real sense, it'll connect you. Say, I've committed, I bought the books, now I'm going to go. And so that would be a great starting point this morning. The fifth principle, the last of our 5 that we wanted to say is that helping future generations starts with us. I find that we can be really motivated, particularly if you've got sons in your life, you've got grandsons, that you're looking at the world of tablets and smartphones and what's happening with video games and social media, and it's like, oh my word, what are my kids going to do? And we want to help them. Helping your kids really begins with you. Do you have a story that you're able to share completely? Are you able to sit with your sons or grandsons or younger men and say, listen to my story and listen to how God redeemed it? Because I find for so many men, even if they say, well, I don't really struggle anymore, but they've never really dealt with the stuff in their past. They've never gotten to a point where they're comfortable talking about it and addressing sexuality. And so maybe that's your motive to jump into the Conquer series or to deal with this, is you say, well, I've been fine for a while, but I want to help others. It starts with you really becoming comfortable of God's work in your life so that you can share with others. I love this quote by John Maxwell who says, we teach what we know, but we reproduce who we are. Mm-hmm. Isn't that so true? That we can teach the right verses of the Bible, we can quote people, we can tell people what not to do, but if we're not able to model it, if we're not able to show authenticity and talk about freedom that God's brought into our life, I think young people can sniff that out. It's like, say, do what I do, do as I say, not as I do. That doesn't go very far, right? I mean, it didn't in my life. If I didn't see it in you, I wasn't going to be able to follow it. And so if you have a heart to help your sons or younger men, I want to challenge you. It starts with you. It starts with your story and allowing God to completely redeem and restore that, because then you'll have something to pour into kids and to younger men. Not just, here's the right thing to know, but here's my story and here's what God does. And in that authenticity, they'll be invited to take the same journey with you.